I believe I am psychic. My first prediction, I am either gonna fly or ruin that family's picnic.
Hey, you've ruined our picnic!
Psychic!
Suck it!
Many of us watch cartoons as a way to escape the real world, but it's always right there, waiting for us the moment Netflix interrupts us to ask if we're still watching. Some animated shows even feature real-world events and situations which sometimes get a little bit too close to reality for comfort. Today, we'll be talking about some scenes from your favorite cartoons that ended up being rather prophetic in hindsight, but even though Homer Simpson may have predicted a major scientific event, sometimes even our favorite cartoons have gotten things wrong.
I have no date, a 2-liter bottle of Shasta, and my all-rush mixtape. Let's rock.
Homer Simpson isn't the smartest guy around, and we all know that he's woefully unqualified for pretty much anything that doesn't involve eating donuts. So it's kind of crazy that he works at a nuclear power plant, and if things go wrong, it could spell disaster for way more than just the humble town of Springfield. But maybe Homer's smarter than we give him credit for, especially since he managed to figure out something that eluded actual scientists for quite some time. Who would have guessed that Homer J. Simpson would solve the mass of the Higgs Boson 14 years before the European Organization for Nuclear Research could do so? In The Wizard of Evergreen Terrace, Homer decides to try his hand at inventing. We have a feeling that he would have been sent home from Shark Tank empty-handed with inventions like an electric hammer and a device that delivers blasts of makeup.
And now you're ready for a night on the town.
But he also calculated the mass of the Higgs boson to be 775 giga-electron volts, or GeV. According to Dr. Simon Singh, author of The Simpsons and Their Mathematical Secrets, that figure is surprisingly similar to the actual 125 GeV estimate made by CERN over a decade later in 2012. The writing team behind The Simpsons contains a surprising number of mathematicians, and the author of that formula was one of them. After his stint on The Simpsons, David X. Cohen became the head writer and executive producer of Futurama, another show that managed to predict the future more than once. Seeing futuristic technology on Futurama isn't exactly surprising, but it's not the only show to feature devices that seemed advanced for the time. Let's take a look back at the classic cartoon, Inspector Gadget. Many of the gadgets we saw used by the Inspector and his allies look an awful lot like the technology we now take for granted. Just look at the Gadget Mobile, which featured an autopilot mode and self-parking abilities. This was unheard of at the time, but now it's becoming more and more commonplace. Then there's Penny's computer book, which looks an awful lot like early versions of laptop computers, which weren't released for years after Penny debuted this tech. It even had a predictive text feature since it assumed what she was searching for after a minimal data input. It also featured digital maps comparable to modern-day Google Maps or satellite navigation systems. She also had a digital camera-like device, which she hooked up to the computer book in order to take photos. Penny was always a step or 12 ahead of her uncle, but apparently she was ahead of her time by our standards as well. Wait a minute, is The Simpsons way more science savvy than we originally thought? Sure, there are lots of jokes about Homer's eating habits and Bart's prank phone calls, but there are also some pretty clever moments hidden in there. It's even possible that the show managed to predict the spread of the coronavirus 27 years ago. Yes, many of us were stunned to discover that our local stores had sold out of toilet paper and disinfectant wipes, but maybe we should have been paying closer attention to The Simpsons lesson on how things like this can spread. In the episode Marge in Chains, Springfield is hit by the fictional Osaka flu. The source of the illness was a Japanese factory worker who coughed into a box before sending it over to the United States, where it was opened by Homer Simpson. Yes, the show managed to demonstrate an illness originating in a foreign country and making its way to the US, but it's not as major of a prediction as some people think. There are edited images of the episode online, which make it seem as though it dealt with coronavirus specifically, but rest assured, the episode only showed the transmission of the Osaka flu and it's not a real thing. At least, not yet. The Simpsons takes place in modern times, but shows like Futurama occur in the distant future, so seeing pieces of futuristic technology is to be expected. The show covers all of the classic sci-fi bases like flying cars, talking robots and humans, colonizing other planets. But even though the show takes place about 1,000 years into the future, it's been able to predict events that happened much sooner than that. In the episode The Lesser of Two Evils, the Planet Express crew visits a place called Pastorama, which is a historical theme park with quite a few inaccuracies. Okay, so maybe cowboys didn't hunt woolly mammoths, but we did end up getting a 9th Star Wars movie like this theater marquee predicted. It was called The Rise of Skywalker, and sadly not Yoda's bar mitzvah, but still, when this Futurama episode came out, we were only up to The Phantom Menace, which did not go over well with many fans. The idea of making the franchise extending to 9 episodes seemed crazy, but apparently it was just crazy enough to happen. And while we haven't seen Yoda's bar mitzvah yet, we did meet another member of his mysterious species in The Mandalorian. It's not exactly a secret that Disney is an absolute behemoth in the entertainment industry, and it's just getting bigger all the time. But there's one specific Disney move which was predicted by The Simpsons long before it actually played out in the real world. During the episode When You Dish Upon a Star, Homer had the opportunity to interact with celebrities such as Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger. And at one point, the 20th Century Fox logo is in plain view, but with a very interesting addition. Underneath the logo are the words, "A division of Walt Disney Co." At the time, Fox operated independently from Disney, but that's no longer the case. This episode aired in 1998, and a couple of decades later, Disney actually did acquire Fox and its properties. Since The Simpsons is part of the Fox Broadcasting Company, Disney doesn't have authority over the show outright, but it does own the production company behind the show, and now fans can binge old episodes on Disney+. Who could have seen this change happening other than The Simpsons themselves? Not only did the show make a prediction that turned out to be true, but apparently it saw its own fate 2 decades into the future. Like The Simpsons, Futurama has also made an incredible amount of predictions about the entertainment industry over the years. We don't quite have talking celebrity heads in jars yet, but some aspects of the show's futuristic world have indeed come to fruition in the real world. Let's take a look at the episode Raging Bender, where the characters visit the set of All My Circuits, the movie. Not only do we get to see esteemed robot actor Calculon up close, but audience members will get to choose which course of action he takes during the film. This seemed like a futuristic concept at the time, but since the episode aired, it's become much more mainstream. There are tons of choose-your-own-adventure style video games now, including Telltale's popular titles The Walking Dead and The Wolf Among Us. We also had the interactive Black Mirror special Bandersnatch released on Netflix. This style of show was considered revolutionary by people who clearly forgot that Futurama did it first. Even though this style of storytelling made it into the real world, it remains to be seen whether it will become mainstream or remain a novelty. Interactive movies definitely sound awesome in theory, but they might take some time to catch on. Let's not forget that even major movie studios often struggle to get simple things right, like adapting one of the most popular and long-running Broadway musicals of all time. Yes, we're talking about the massive critical and financial failure that was the Katz Movie. Despite the fact that it was an adaptation of a beloved play featuring a celebrity cast and a $100 million budget, most audience members couldn't stand it. And there's definitely a couple of cartoon characters we know would not have been fans. In 1997, the Quantity Time episode of Hey Arnold aired and seemed to predict this cinematic disaster. Arnold's not-so-secret admirer Helga and her father went to see a parody of the play Cats, appropriately titled Rats, and they weren't exactly fans. They laughed through the entire thing and declared it the stupidest thing they'd ever seen. When the Katz movie premiered, many Hey Arnold fans couldn't help but think that, hey, we've seen this somewhere before. Universal Pictures could have saved a lot of money if they'd have taken a hint from this Hey Arnold episode. Speaking of controversial creative decisions, let's talk about the final season of Game of Thrones. We know everyone is doing their best to forget it didn't happen, but let's take a look back for a moment. The show earned no shortage of fans because of its interesting characters, in-depth world building, and the many twists and turns the story followed over the years. And then we have Season 8, where things got really unpredictable. And not in a good way. Who could have seen the heroic Daenerys Targaryen, breaker of chains and mother of dragons, raising King's Landing to the ground atop Drogon? Well, apparently the writers of The Simpsons. The episode Simpsons puts the family in a fictional world similar to Westeros. It was clearly a Game of Thrones parody, and there's a scene in which the family watches helplessly as a dragon torches their village. Daenerys turning into the Mad Queen was definitely a surprise to most Game of Thrones viewers, but apparently the Simpsons saw it coming from a mile away. But perhaps the most impressive thing here is that this plot point worked just fine on The Simpsons, but did not go over so well with fans of Game of Thrones. Now let's take a look at some non-fictional twists predicted by fictional shows. In the Futurama episode The Lesser of Two Evils, we got to see a Miss Universe pageant. Even if you're not a fan of pageantry in real life, you have to admit that in this version, they actually feature contestants from elsewhere in the universe. Has anyone else noticed that our version has a lot of contestants who are just from boring old Earth? Anyway, in the episode, Zap Brannigan calls out Leela's name instead of the actual winner. Then, she's stripped of her flowers and crown, which are presented to the true winner, Miss Vega 4. This awkward scene is very similar to what we saw play out on stage years later when Steve Harvey hosted the event. He declared Miss Columbia to be the winner instead of the true victor, Miss Philippines. This was a horribly uncomfortable moment, but it felt familiar to fans of Futurama. Futurama features tons of futuristic inventions, but The Simpsons not so much. Well, usually. There have been occasions in which the show features pieces of technology that didn't exist at the time, but that we take for granted now. Autocorrect might not seem futuristic, but let's not forget that it always hasn't been around to turn our strongly worded texts into messages about ducks. Back in 1994, The Simpsons episode Lisa on Ice aired. During a school assembly, Dolph tries to make a memo of his Newton device, which would remind him to beat up Martin later on. But thanks to the device's autocorrect feature, it ended up saying "eat up Martha" instead. This was a joke which predicted an important piece of tech, but the episode had an even greater impact than most folks realized. Nitin Ganatra was Apple's engineer director who claims this episode was frequently referenced behind the scenes. Apparently, while working on the software used in the iPhone's keyboard, the team would frequently use the phrase "eat up Martha" to stress the importance of getting things just right. Even though autocorrect isn't always perfect, it seems like an impossible concept a couple of decades ago. Earlier, we mentioned that hover cars are a standard sci-fi staple when presenting stories that take place in the future. But sometimes, these scenes come way too early. In the Simpsons episode Futurama, Bart and Lisa got to see what their lives would be like 8 years in the future when they graduate from high school. It turns out that their parents finally separated after Homer spent all of their savings on an underwater house. Come on, is that really any worse than watching him drink away all the family's excess funds? Homer's underwater home might not have gone according to plan, but at the very least, he does have a hover car, which is something many of us have dreamed of. But the problem here is that this episode is supposed to take place in the year 2013, and needless to say, we're a long ways away from zooming around in hover cars. Our vehicles may be able to drive themselves, but they still have to make contact with the road, at least for now. Of course, there are a number of things in this vision of 2013 which definitely weren't true, including the US dollar being replaced by the Reagan,
The deposit on this tux was 200 Reagans.
and scientists inventing magic. Futurama takes us past the year 2013 into 3000. Even though we're not quite there yet, there are some aspects of the show too fantastical to ever take place. There are tons of celebrities featured on the show, or at least some parts of them. In the future, presented in Futurama, celebrities' heads were revived using special cloning technology. Not only are these clones physical copies, but they also retain the memories and mannerisms of the original humans. Except that this isn't at all how cloning technology works. First of all, long gone folks like Abraham Lincoln wouldn't have enough DNA left to make any kind of clone at all. But even among newer stars, it wouldn't be possible to have their heads in jars like we see on Futurama. We can clone animals, but they don't have the same personalities or memories of the originals. They might share DNA, but there's a lot more to people than their genetic makeup, and that won't change no matter how far into the future you look ahead. Over the years, The Simpsons have made a ton of predictions about the future that have turned out to be true, but there are some fans who give the show too much credit when it comes to being clairvoyant. When a fire broke out at the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, a rumor started going around that this was one of the many events predicted by The Simpsons. An image even started making rounds on the internet which showed Mr. Burns standing in front of the Notre Dame of Springfield while it was engulfed in flames. Interestingly enough, this image is from an actual episode of the show, but it's been altered. The real scene is from the episode Husbands and Knives, where Marge starts up a woman's only gym and Homer is jealous of her success. We do see the Notre Dame Cathedral of Springfield, but it's not on fire, and Mr. Burns isn't standing in front of it. This scene was actually a parody of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and not a prediction of things to come. In this episode, Homer underwent surgery to alter his appearance and then gets chased by an angry mob, which is similar to what poor Quasimodo went through. Futurama has introduced us to many different alien species, but there are plenty of native Earth-based creatures around as well. Somehow in the future, owls of all things have taken to plague the city of New York City. According to the show, by the time 2999 rolled around, owls had totally replaced rats as the primary pests in the city. There are even owl exterminating services which deal with problems caused by these birds. Out of all the craziness of the show, this is honestly one of the most implausible aspects. Owls eat rodents, which means that if there are none in the city, owls wouldn't replace them, they would starve. It would have the exact opposite effect of owls taking over. In fact, some fans think this impossibility of owls infecting a city is exactly the point. This part of the show could be a parody of the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. In this story, owls can't cope with changes in their environment and become rare, if not outright extinct. It's possible that Futurama's owl problem was meant to illustrate what else Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep might have gotten wrong about the future. Let's take another look at the trip The Simpsons took into the future in the episode Lisa's Wedding. Well, the future here is in 2010, but hey, the episode came out all the way back in 1995. Lisa visits a fortune teller at the Renaissance Fair, who predicts that she'll get engaged to a man named Hugh Parkfield. When Lisa travels to England in order to meet her future in-laws, we see that the iconic Big Ben has made the switch to digital. Clearly, since we're well past 2010 at this point, The Simpsons got this one wrong. Not only that, but we highly doubt Big Ben would ever lose its iconic clock face in favor of a digital one, since it's a cultural icon. In fact, as recently as 2017, a restoration plan was put in place to preserve the clock. The chimes were silenced to allow for repairs, and the clock face was restored to its former state. The only modernization Big Ben is getting is a new elevator, not an entirely new method of telling time. Which one of these futuristic predictions was your favorite? Are there any that we missed? Share your pick with us in the comments section below, and don't forget to click on the subscribe button and turn on your notifications for more of the latest and greatest content from us here at ScreenRant. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next time.